I am a huge fan of Lovecraftian horror. Something about that unknowable cosmic horror just grabs me in the right sort of way. I even have a copy of Lovecraft's collected works, the Necronomicon, proving that I read books and am quite wise.
Nope.
Despite how much I love this genre, it seems like good examples of it in gaming are few and far between. Developers have a difficult time porting it over to interactive media. It's the sort of thing that requires the sparking of imagination that only the written word seems to be able to convey quite right. So when a title does come along that does such a good job sending that message of true cosmic horror, it's going to stick with you. I hope you'll join me in entering into the madness with one of the most slept-on survival horror games of the last 30 years. The Darkness Comes.
I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen to me. Damn them! Damn their eyes! They didn't believe me. Strange creatures, the world in peril from unseen foes. Death, the darkness. Instead, they jeered and threw me into this forsaken place. A place of empty souls and fevered thoughts, reeking of fetor and decay. Thinking me mad with delirium. The fools cast away their hopes of salvation, but locking me in this damned asylum. May the rats eat your eyes! I am now lost to your cause! The darkness comes! It will damn us all!
I've been trying to decide what game to cover for Pumpkin Spice Month for a while now. I tend to veer towards fantasy and adventure on the channel, but survival horror is also a huge love of mine. The problem tends to be finding one that is half decent. So many horror games just aren't scary. I had initially thought of doing a playthrough of Silent Hill, but I'm sure there's already a few thousand videos of that on YouTube. Besides, I'm a certified contrarian. No way I could cover something so mainstream right when its remake is being released. I have to wait for it to be out of the public eye before I can cover it.
Stop being so extra.
I decided to do something a touch more niche, but also no less fantastic, able to go toe-to-toe with any other third-person survival horror of the time. That's not to say Eternal Darkness is wildly obscure or anything. In fact, in the right circles, it's fairly well known and well received. The obscurity of it comes from the fact that it was only ever released for the Nintendo GameCube. Even now, if you want to play it, you're either emulating or playing on original hardware. It's never been ported to my knowledge. Believe it or not, I still have my GameCube all these years later. I had to re-buy some aftermarket controllers, but despite heavy years of use, it still runs perfectly. Even my Game Boy player attachment works. Unfortunately, regardless of my experiences, it didn't sell well compared to other 6th generation consoles. Its biggest competitor was the Xbox, and even that outsold it by nearly 3 times. The PS2 outsold it with 16 units sold per one GameCube. That is to say, not a lot of people owned one of these scrappy little gaming cubes, and even less people still played mature titles on it. It was mostly marketed to a young audience. This is super unfortunate, as the game did a lot in the genre that even bigger names in the horror scene weren't doing at the time. This isn't surprising, however, as the developer for this game series were the legendary Silicon Knights, the same people that developed the Legacy of Kain series. It's hard to find a game by them that isn't at least innovative in some way. Eternal Darkness has a great hook to get things going. Before we can even get the barest sense as to what's going on, the game starts, shambling horrors closing in and nowhere to run. No one ever said the great old ones played fair. If you've played a third-person survival horror, you'll be right at home in Eternal Darkness. They did a lot to change up the formula, but at its core this game plays just like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, tank controls and all. The game borrowed some inspiration from Resident Evil, in that a large part of your journey centers around exploring a big spooky mansion. In stark contrast to that title, however, the mansion was much smaller, and you would have access to 70% of it from the very start of the game. There was some of that slow progression to unlock new rooms as the story progressed, but not nearly to the extent that Resident Evil did it. Instead, Eternal Darkness would employ time jumping to fill out the story. As the battle against cosmic horrors is not one fought by an individual, but across generations. We would see the ancestors of our protagonist and other warriors against the darkness struggle meekly against the overwhelming powers of ancient evil, with a story spanning millennia. This had a massive impact on the gameplay. A Roman centurion would be limited to the weaponry and tactics of his time, whereas a firefighter assisting in shutting down oil fires at the end of the Gulf War would have access to automatic weaponry and explosives. Going deeper, the characters even had differing health, magic, and sanity pools to draw from. A Franciscan monk might be easily shaken by the darkness, but have a high pool of magical energy to draw on. Similarly, a World War I reporter would have a high tolerance for bloodshed and the madness of war, but a lower reserve of magic. This game did a great job in balancing the characters around their respective technological and spiritual limits, though admittedly some are just better than others. From a practical perspective, I found in most cases melee weapons had a greater effect than their ranged counterparts. Trying to take down zombies with dual 18th century flintlock pistols seems badass on paper, but in reality running them through with a rapier is going to be easier in most cases. Even the more modern weapons like the assault rifle felt sadly underpowered. An axe is just going to pack a bigger wallop in most cases. And the explosives, while powerful, often felt useless in the claustrophobic alleys you did combat in. The game also had a rudimentary dismemberment system, which once again felt better suited to melee than ranged combat. Outside these conventional tools, the game had two other systems that set it far apart from its contemporaries in the magic and sanity systems. Let's start with sanity. Simple on paper, but very well implemented in this sort of game. You had a sanity bar, similar to your health pool, except it was reduced from a variety of factors. Most commonly, it would drain from seeing a horror beyond your reckoning, or occasionally would just drop due to your current circumstances or unlocking a piece of the cosmic puzzle. There are things we aren't supposed to know. Changing one's worldview generally comes with some growing pains. Sanity could be refilled by completing finishing moves on enemies or through use of magic, or, in one specific case, through the consumption of alcohol.
Alcohol is no substitute for proper mental health practices.
But if you did let it reach zero, sanity effects would instead begin to drain your health. More interestingly though, having low sanity could cause a variety of effects, some simply unsettling, or in a few cases even fourth wall breaking. One famous one that I unfortunately did not capture in this playthrough is occasionally low sanity in the game would display a controller not connected placard on the screen, while hordes of undead shambled toward you. I remember this happening to me for the first time years ago and getting genuinely flustered, rushing up to try and replug my controller in before realizing the game was messing with me. Another interesting one I did get on this playthrough was when I was trying to save with low sanity, the game made it seem as though I had misclicked, and stated that it was deleting my save file. I legitimately was smashing on my controller trying to get it to stop. Even 20 years later, this game is still getting me with its sanity mechanics.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
You would think I would know better. Magic in Eternal Darkness, spelled with a K so you know it's good, was complex and very interesting for the time. I don't know another game that had a similar system, though I'm sure someone in the comments will correct me. That's okay, I appreciate you, comment section, even if you exist mostly to prove me wrong. Essentially, the magic worked by creating spells through the use of runic incantation. Each spell would have 2 rune words and a rune denoting an old god. Later, you could improve the strength of your spells with power runes. So each spell, of which there are 12, could be cast at one of 3 power levels, and have the effects of one of 3 great old ones. Actually, one of 4, as there's actually a secret old god in this game as well. The selection of old god to power your spell worked as a very basic system in which certain gods overpowered others. So for example, if you were fighting the followers of Chaturga, you would want to be using spells empowered by Ulyaoth. The three main gods each had a weakness, and a secret god, Mantarok, could overpower them all. The system has some further depth in that some spells were completely different based on the god chosen. For example, a Xelatoth Recover would give some sanity, whereas drawing on Chaturga would recover some health. It sounds very overwhelming, but it is simple in practice, and new spells are drip-fed to the player for the first half of the game, so the learning curve is slow and steady. Sometimes you would have an entire chapter dedicated to learning a single spell. Practicality aside, I always loved casting spells in this game just for how it looked and sounded. Having the runes appear on the ground around you while the spell built power was always really rewarding, especially when a powerful spell would cast just before your foes reached you. This game has Goosebumps mastered. Outside these amazing gameplay systems, the game worked like other survival horrors at the time, in that you would be solving puzzles throughout. I will admit the puzzle aspect of Eternal Darkness is rather weak. I don't think there is one that took longer than a couple seconds to figure out. There's a balance between having a puzzle be hard enough to feel rewarding, and be so easy to make it feel kind of pointless, and Eternal Darkness often falls on the easy side of that coin. The hardest puzzle in the game involves shining a beam of light onto a little city, and if you can't solve that one, you might need to just go watch Indiana Jones. Our current day heroine is Alexandra Roivas, and the cold open here is her in a room with shambling horrors heading her way. Luckily we figure out the controls pretty quick and make these particular ghouls somewhat more headless. A spectral figure appears, but before he can say more than a few words, we're awoken by a ringing phone. Remember when phones need to be plugged in? What a wild time. Seems the horrors and the spirit were just a dream. The call is from a detective. It appears something has happened to our grandfather at the family estate in Rhode Island. Arriving at the manor, the detective very ham-fistedly shows us the corpse of our grandfather, brutally mangled and destroyed. Not even a head remains. Probably not the best way to inform next of kin of a death in the family. In a surprisingly Chad move, Alexandra calls the incompetent police officer out on his bullshit, and states she won't be leaving until she gets answers on what happened. The police clean up the scene, and we make ourselves comfortable in the house. We won't be leaving until we get the answers we seek. We explore the manor a bit, and eventually come across our grandfather's secret study. Took us about 5 minutes to find it. Pretty vile detective work there, Rhode Island PD. In the study, we find a sword and the Tome of Eternal Darkness. A leather-bound tome with otherworldly abilities. Just opening it gives us a glimpse of unexplainable events and horrific creatures. Reading on, we enter our first chapter, the tale of Pius Augustus, a Roman centurion from 28 BC. His story is the earliest in the tome. He and his men are somewhere in Persia, searching for a mysterious artifact at the behest of the emperor. Mere moments after setting off on our own in the desert, a voice on the wind calls us to a circle of standing stones. Stepping amongst them transports us to what we will later learn to call the City of the Ancients. Within, we find the first of many horrors to come. Being a seasoned warrior, Augustus makes short work of the enemies here, and shows little fear outside the initial shock of seeing the ghouls for the first time. One wonders if he perhaps had some advanced knowledge of this artifact the Emperor sent him after. Regardless, a few short puzzles later we find ourselves in a room with 3 glowing relics. Our mind is filled with maddening whispers, and here we make a choice that will guide the rest of the game. Whichever relic Pius chooses here will dictate the old god we'll be facing for the rest of the story. This has little effect on the actual story beats of the game, but will change much in terms of the enemies we face and the bosses we encounter. I decide to choose the red artifact, representing Chaturga, the many-mouthed horror. Upon touching the artifact, Augustus is overcome by its energies, becoming twisted and skeletal. His contact with the corrosive energies have granted him massive powers, but have made him little more than a slave to the ancient god. We return to the manor and very quickly discover another page to the Tome of Eternal Darkness, and another story to uncover. This is the gameplay loop for much of the rest of the game. We explore a tale from the past, return to the current day with a further understanding of the dark forces at work, and then proceed on to the next tale. For this next story, we're taken to the year 1150, in Angkor Thom, Cambodia. We see through the eyes of a young dancer, Alaya, reading a supposedly fictitious tale about the death of an unknown god. It turns out that that old god is not so fictitious, and the one doing the killing is none other than Augustus himself, now a powerful warlock in the service of Chaturga. It seems the death of this ancient god occurred in a place very similar to where the dancer finds herself now. Cutting back to the young dancer, she is wishing she could be involved in something so fantastical and important. She would get her wish. The doors of the temple seal behind us, and we have no choice but to explore the old ruin. The place is littered with traps, ghouls, and puzzles. We can persevere to the end, and find that this temple is indeed the one where that same god was killed. Augustus arrives shortly after, seemingly searching for something. The hulking abomination in the middle of the room is Mantarok, the corpse god. He was serving in some sort of role to keep the other three old ones in check, but his death has started a cycle of events that will allow them to enter our world from whatever corner of space they currently inhabit. The damage done to Mantarok by Augustus means his death is assured, but the death of an old one does not happen quickly. He will rot and fester for thousands of years to come. His power is not completely lost, however. He sends one of his agents to implant Alaya with the old god's relic, Mantarok's heart. Unfortunately, not too long after this, Augustus catches up to us, and we're no match for the skeletal centurion. When she refuses to reveal the location of the heart, he uses his magic to kill her, or so it would seem for now. We're back in the mansion as Alex for only a moment before the next page is revealed. We find ourselves in the year 1814 in France. We enter the shoes of Anthony, a young messenger directed to bring a letter to Charlemagne. Being a nosy sort, Anthony opens the letter and finds it contains a trap spell. It's done something to him. Though as of now, what exactly that is remains unclear. We rush to the cathedral where Charlemagne should be, but find he's in some sort of meeting and the local monks are suspiciously not helpful getting us an audience, despite the emergency nature of the letter. We'll need to get the key to the chamber ourselves. Moving up the stairs, we're transported to another place, where we're able to take possession of the Tome of Eternal Darkness. In here we see the statue of Alaya, the first casualty in the fight against the darkness. We also find the broken statue of Augustus, presumably broken as he's lost to the darkness completely. It actually sort of raises a continuity issue here that's always bugged me about this game. Alaya's story technically takes place after Anthony's. Shouldn't there be no statues here yet? It's still 200 years until Alaya meets Mantarok. Actually, there's a story we haven't even read yet that predates both of them. I'm probably just overthinking it.
You always do.
Anyhow, after grabbing the tome, we're back in the cathedral. Anthony seemingly unfazed by being transported to a literal nightmare realm. Back in the church, we take it upon ourselves to open the casket here and find the monk within horribly mutilated. This triggers the other monks to finally start helping out. They give us a sword and tell us we need to get into the bishop's chambers where Charlemagne is and let them know what is happening. Apparently, even though the door to that chamber is right there, we can't just knock. We have to go find the key to get in. This always bugged me. It's like, there's an emergency, but we won't just knock on the damn door. We get our first spell here, Enchant Item. It lets us both power up our attacks and repair items that are broken. We make our way through the temple, use the spell to fix a couple vases, and eventually get the key we need. All the while slowly becoming more zombie-like due to the curse that letter put on us. On the way back to the bishop's chambers, we meet our first trappers. Annoying little beasts that teleport you to some sort of pocket dimension if you move by them too fast. They're simple enough to deal with if you have a ranged weapon, but with nothing but melee, our only choice is to sneak by as quietly as possible. Finally entering the bishop's chambers, we're too late. Charlemagne is already dead, and the monk that killed him is revealed to be a creature himself.
You are a fool for trying to save him, Anthony. His fate was decided many centuries ago, as is the fate of this world. Despite your faith, there is little to save you from the power of Chaturanga.
Unfortunate. As a fun side note, I feel like Anthony, of all the stories here, probably has the least effect on helping fight the darkness. I mean, really, what did he do? He read a letter he wasn't supposed to read, got cursed, wandered around in a church for a while, then died at the feet of his enemy. Not exactly a great warrior against the darkness. Back in the manor, I do some poking around. Finding the next page is simple, but on the way to do it, we get the most effective jump scare in the entire game. If you go to the second floor bathroom and inspect the tub, you get this completely out of left field animation. I jumped a kilometer out of my seat for that. This is not a game with jump scares. That is literally the only one. I guess that makes it effective. Next up, we're back to 565 AD, once again returning to Persia, taking control of a man named Karim. He is sent to the city of the ancients to recover a relic for a woman he's trying to romance. She very clearly has no interest in him, but wants this relic so badly she'll give herself to him if he can recover it. Karim reluctantly agrees to this quest, but only if she promises to wait for him. She agrees, and the young romantic is off into the desert. There isn't a lot to say about Karim's chapter. He moves through the same ruins Augustus moved through so many years prior. Though the layout has changed with the passage of time, we find many of the same rooms. At the end, we find the relic chamber previously entered by Augustus, except now there's but one artifact, that of Zelatoth. Before we can touch it, a ghost appears. The woman Karim wanted is apparently dead. She betrayed Karim with a nobleman not long after he left. Unfortunately for her, she chose a married man to sleep with, and his wife had her flensed with knives, skinned, and gutted. Karim is understandably somewhat disenchanted with the woman, though, to be honest, I think they both sort of suck. He just wants to sleep with her because she's pretty, and she just wanted to use him to find a treasure. They're sort of made for each other. Regardless, she convinces him to stay and guard the artifact with her against the darkness. The chapter ends with the couple sharing a kiss that seems not so pleasant for young Karim. Love's tough. We find the next chapter page in a jar of spice, and are quickly in the shoes of our first direct ancestor, Maximilian Roivas, an 18th century doctor. This is one of the more interesting chapters in the game. We get to explore the manor and see just how different it was over a century ago. We explore for some time, collecting items, weapons, and runes, until eventually finding a hidden room behind the fireplace. Within, we find the Tome of Eternal Darkness once again, and the once peaceful home is suddenly overcome with demons and monsters of all kinds. The servants working right under our noses turn out to be minions of the old god Chaturanga. We're able to learn the Reveal Invisible spell and find an entire basement below the manor. Within, we find a well, and draining it reveals a ladder leading below into the darkness. Here we have the biggest reveal of the entire game. There is an entire city below our feet, a city filled with the horrible servants of Chaturanga. We barely make it to the entryway of this place before meeting the game's first true boss encounter. A 5-legged spider-like creature able to cast magic and summon allies lies between us and the city. It's not too difficult to fight, but it's enough to convince Maximilian he can't face this darkness on his own. He retreats out of the city and we cut to some time later. Max has been imprisoned in an asylum. It seems the world didn't believe him, instead thinking him insane. He's a real Mad Max. The poor man lives out his days in the disgusting asylum, unable to continue his fight against the darkness. The next story has us back in Anchorthom. For the last time, thank goodness. Of all the locales we visit in this journey, this one is my least favorite. The year is 1983, and we take the role of Edwin Lindsay, an Indiana Jones wannabe. He's found Mantarok's temple with a fellow explorer, Augustine. Upon finding the temple, it seems Augustine is not what he appears. He is the warlock Augustus, and attempts to take Lindsay down. We escape, and what follows is probably one of my least favorite chapters. The whole place is just a maze of similar-looking trap-laden rooms that are going to require you to constantly stop to heal and catch your breath while your stamina recovers. There's really very little to say about this chapter. Toward the end, you can gain the ability to summon a small trapper beast of your own, and using it you can uncover a secret room to get the Mantarok rune, letting you cast spells empowered by the corpse god. One of only 2 real secrets in the game, it's worth picking up. The end of the chapter has Lindsay finding the not-so-dead corpse of Elia. Seems she's been here guarding the heart of Mantarok for a good 800 years. She gives the heart to Lindsay, who in turn brings it to Edward Roivas, our grandfather. Turns out the heart is here in the house, behind a book in the library. We gather up the relic in the current day, and are treated to a scene of Augustus, in an unknown time and place. He has the Ulioth artifact, and summons a creature of incredible size to guard it. Likely something we're going to need to deal with to complete this saga, but for now we start the next chapter. We're back in France, but now in the time of the Inquisition. We enter the shoes of Luther, a Franciscan monk visiting the cathedral seeking a viewing of the sacred relic, the Hand of Jude. The leader of the Inquisition gives off serious Palpatine vibes. He lets us into the church to stay, but warns us they are looking for heretics. I'm sure that won't have any effect on our goodly Franciscan monk. Within mere minutes, it has an effect on our goodly Franciscan monk. We find a horribly mutilated corpse in the church, and are immediately blamed for it by the Inquisition, and locked away. We literally just walked in the door. There is no way we were responsible for that. Soon after, the custodian for the cathedral comes and frees us from our imprisonment, stating we're in great danger, that the cathedral has become home to many strange goings-on of late. The custodian does not believe we're involved, and instead thinks the Inquisition are to blame. The corpse we found is that of Brother Andrew, and he was apparently documenting his time at the holy site. Perhaps finding the entries would give some insight to his death, or what is happening here. Moving through, we find the old part of this cathedral that is the church Anthony died in 600 years ago. Or not died, it would seem. He is still a ghoul lying just where he fell in the bishop's chamber. Are we to understand that no one has entered this particular room in 600 years? Kind of suspect, but we just go with it. Anthony drops an item we need for progression into the lower levels of the church. We gather up all the journal pages throughout the church, and they seem to point to this sect of priests not having the Holy Hand of Jude, but instead the cursed relic, the essence of Ulioth. They have been luring pilgrims here just to sacrifice them to their heretical god. We bring the journal to the custodian, and he seems convinced that we have the evidence to prove this order are heretics. But instead of taking this information to the church, we head back into the cellar to learn more. A strangely custodian-shaped coffin with a dagger-shaped hole blocks our passage. Without another thought, Luther sticks the dagger in, eliciting a scream from within the box. Literally 1 room later, we get confirmation we just killed the custodian by accident. Who could have seen that coming? We finally enter the lowest steps of the church and find ourselves in the room from Alex's earlier vision. A great beast rises from the pit, and it is clear Luther is in far past his limit. The leader of the Inquisition makes it known that he was Augustus in disguise. Augustus wants to take Luther for himself, but it seems the Guardian has other plans and crushes the poor monk with little fanfare. Looks like there's some trouble in paradise between Augustus and the Guardian. Something will have to be done to keep the beast in tow. The next chapter takes place in a very similar time frame, but far separated geographically. We step into the role of Roberto, an architect captured by a warlord and forced to survey the site of a great construction the warlord is completing. Trapped in the ruins, we have little choice but to comply. Before long, we realize we're once again in the city of the ancients in Persia. Another somewhat forgettable chapter, we move through the familiar yet changed environs of the city, eventually making our way to the relic chamber. Within, we find Kareem, now a spirit and guardian of the relic of Zelatoth. He tests us and find we're the one destined to carry it out of this place. We release Kareem from his duty, grab the relic, finish the survey, and move to leave the ruins. The warlord is awaiting us at the end. Since the survey is complete, he no longer needs us. We come to one of the more horrifying scenes of the game. People are being thrown into a pit. It seems the construction in question is a tower built out of hundreds of people, sacrificed alive to the god Chaturga. Grim stuff. But the warlord, who is actually Augustus, didn't check our pockets before tossing us in, so at least the artifact is relatively safe. For now. The next chapter brings us back to the cathedral in France. Now in the shoes of a war reporter, Peter Jacob. This guy has 2 first names, so you know he's going to be a badass. This is a really memorable chapter for a lot of reasons. And our last trip to the old cathedral. The human cost of the Great War is so apparent here. The entire chapter drips with the oppressive atmosphere of that conflict, and gives the dread implication that the war itself may on some scale be occurring to fuel the dark needs of the old ones. If nothing else, the field hospital here serves as a front to make sacrifices to the guardian below, who grows tired of his duty after hundreds of years guarding the artifact. The chapter has a notable puzzle where we transport a corpse away using a summoned trapper. Hilariously, anytime we visit that pocket dimension from now on, we'll find the corpse still there, even when playing as other characters in different timelines. It doesn't decay either, which speaks to the properties of that alternate dimension. I suppose time doesn't pass there, or it's just outside the timeline in general. At the end of this chapter, we find ourselves once again in the massive hall where the Guardian resides. But we're ready now. No longer playing as a quivering Franciscan monk, we are a battle-hardened war reporter, and freshly equipped with the magical attack spell. The Guardian boss is equal parts really interesting and tedious, and easily the most difficult in the game. He has 3 phases. In phase 1, he launches projectiles at you that you must dodge, and after a time, he'll need to recover his strength and become vulnerable. This is when you need to hit him with a magic attack. 3 hits later, and we come to phase 2. The arena shrinks, and the boss summons some zombies for you to tangle with. The concept here is the same, but the gameplay itself makes it extremely frustrating. After summoning the zombies, the Guardian enters his vulnerable state. You need to get him with a magic attack in this very short window. But the targeting in the game makes it so your attack will pretty well always auto-target the much closer zombies. And getting in close with the Guardian switches him into melee mode where he won't be vulnerable. The fight turns out into a drawn-out battle of trying to get the zombies down before his vulnerable state ends, half the time missing at no fault of your own. It is a pain. The whole fight took me well over 15 minutes, and most of that was just in phase 2. Phase 3, you're forced into melee range, and it's just a matter of dodging his strikes and hitting his small recovery window. It's tense, but not too offensive. After the beast falls, we recover the artifact and leave. 69 years pass, and Peter is delivering the artifact to Edward. Seems another relic is somewhere in this house. Only a few more chapters to finish out this battle against the old ones. And this next one is huge, both in actual size and an implication. The year is 1952. We're playing as Edward Roivas, our grandfather. The answers to his death may soon be ours. The chapter starts very similar to Maximilian, in that we wander the manor and collect supplies. Eventually we come to our secret study and get our hands on the Tome of Eternal Darkness. From here, everything goes downhill. A vampire appears inside our house. And not the modern day sexy type of vampire, but the horrific invincible demon type that can tear your skin off and pull out your blood with telekinesis. We can injure it, to a degree, but it will keep healing itself at a shrine in the basement. We make our way down there, destroy the shrine, and are able to finally put the beast down for good. But in doing so, we've unsealed the well. And just like our ancestor, we are not ready for what we find down there. The madness-inducing City of Lights right below our home. Unlike Maximilian before him, Edward has no qualms about entering the city on his own. What comes next is the most combat-heavy part of the game so far. Or ever for the rest of it, really. We find a central rune chamber and teleporter. The goal here is to set the 9 runes to cast one massive Dispel magic, with the intention of removing all Chattur'gha's minions from the city, hopefully derailing Augustus's plans to summon the old god to our world. Each rune will need to be activated manually, and each time you activate one, you're teleported to a random part of the city and forced to fight your way back to the main chamber to input the next rune. It's not bad. I mean, Edward gets an elephant rifle that is super fun to fire, but it does drag on for a long time. If this was the only time you did this, it wouldn't be too offensive, but we'll be back here repeating this process before too long. Anyhow, Dispel magic in place, we get to make a dramatic escape from the city, and are treated to a spectacular view of the city being cleansed of Chattur'gha. 48 years pass. We're now in the current day. Edward is sitting by the fire, opening a book, when a large creature appears behind him. The monster lunges forward and we cut to black. Why they waited 48 years to seek their vengeance on Edward is unknown, but we have an answer as to why Edward is dead at last. Unfortunately, this is not exactly closure for Alex. Sure, the city was razed, but it still stands, and with Mantarok dead, the arrival of Chattur'gha is at best delayed, not stopped. We need to finish the tome. Back in control of Alex, we do some exploring of the manor, most notably breaking into the once sealed servants' quarters. We receive a vision of what happened here. It seems all those years ago, Maximilian came through and killed the servants. His brush with the ancients drove him mad, seeing each of his servants as potential agents of Chattur'gha. Not an unfounded fear, but it gives some more weight as to why he was left to rot in that asylum. We take the stethoscope found here and use it to access a safe in the basement. Within, we find the relic of Ulyaoth. Just one missing now, and we'll get some closure on that in our next and final chapter of the tome. This time we play as Michael, a Canadian firefighter hired to help at the end of the Gulf War in getting things settled in the Middle East. He and his team are fighting an oil fire. They're setting up explosives to close off the oil well, but something goes wrong. There's an explosion, and he awakens somewhere deep underground in an ancient ruin. Everyone is dead except you. And after an extremely short period of mourning, we find the pillar constructed of human remains from Roberto's chapter. The spirit of Roberto himself appears to pass the relic of Zelatoth on to Michael. There isn't a lot to say about this chapter. To me, it's probably neck and neck with Lindsay's chapter for being the worst in the game. And it sort of feels tagged on to give closure to the Zelatoth relic storyline. To be fair, the Persia location is the most reused area in the game. It does get changed between chapters, but it's generally the same rooms connected by different hallways. This chapter's mostly memorable for giving you an assault rifle with a grenade launcher on it. You can also find an enchanted gladius here that can be used in the final fight with Augustus. You make your way through the ruins, use some C4 to destroy a weak point, and make a mad dash to safety. After the fact, Michael delivers the artifact and sword to Edward and wanders off into the night. The tome is now complete. Back in the modern day, Alex receives a parcel that contains the last artifact, as well as the enchanted gladius if you found it. From here, it's clear we cannot stop the arrival of Chattur'gha, but we can possibly stop him once he arrives. Ulyaoth can overpower Chattur'gha, so if we bring them both here, perhaps they can kill each other. It's worth a shot at least. Worth noting, from here on out, there are monsters in the modern day house. Up until now, Alex had only read about them. The time of summoning is near. The powers of darkness are growing. Moving under the house into the ruins, this next part of the game is super disappointing. We need to do exactly what Edward did, except this time the runic machine is powered by the relics of the old gods we've been gathering. We need to go through and turn on each rune, only this time we want to do a summoning rather than a dispel. It's one of those moments in video games where you think, nah, there's no way they're gonna make me do that all again, right? It'll be a cinematic or something. Nope, they really make you do all 9 runes again. and now they each have a puzzle rather than combat encounters, making them take even longer. Anyhow, all that tedium done, we step through into the final fight. The final battle is not particularly hard, but it is very enjoyable and super cinematic. Before the fight starts, Augustus summons Chattur'gha, but at the same time our summoning goes off to summon Ulyaoth. So while we fight Augustus, a battle of the gods is raging on above us.
For the banquet your race shall provide.
You forget what it means to be human, Pious. The human race will never go quietly into the darkness. For as long as you have spent summoning your lord, people have struggled against you. Now, thanks to their efforts, I have 3 of the Ancient's essences. Now, Pious, this is the end!
The end indeed.
The fight itself is fairly straightforward. You need to strike Augustus, which will in turn reveal the relic of Chattur'gha, which you must then hit with a weapon bearing the enchantment of Ulyaoth. After your first hit, things get really dramatic. We see Elia's spirit come out of her statue in the hall of the Tome of Eternal Darkness. Her spirit, and the spirit of all the others that died in this fight, come through to assist in this final showdown. The rest of the fight will follow the formula of hit Pious, enter the ghostly form of one of the Chosen, strike the artifact, and repeat. Intermittently, we will see the Battle of the Ancient Ones raging on above us. Like I said, this game knows how to do goosebumps. Once the artifact is destroyed, Augustus is exposed and we start to focus our wrath on him directly. Before long, both he and his lord fall. But this isn't the end. Ulyaoth just killed Chattur'gha, but Ulyaoth is just as able and willing to destroy our world. We need to use the runic gate one last time to bind Ulyaoth once more. This is a dramatic conclusion where the spirit of our grandfather reactivates the runic gate to finally seal away the last ancient and end this once and for all. But it raises a big question. Why didn't we just bind Chattur'gha in the first place? Why summon Ulyaoth just to seal him away? The good news is, it now seems this is finally over, but realistically 2 Ancient Ones yet remain, and with Mantarok dead, what is to stop them from entering our world? The binding spell has a limited duration even on basic enemies. How long can it really keep Ulyaoth contained? A few centuries? Less? Interestingly, there is another ending, one unlocked from playing through the game 3 times, choosing to do battle with a different ancient each time. It doesn't offer much more in the way of story, but it hints toward Mantarok being the puppet master to these events more than we might have realized. But with this being the one and only entry in the series, hard answers as to what exactly will become of the ever-dying corpse god remains a mystery. Some things are better left unknown.
My mistake was made clear. This ancient could lay the world to ruin just as easily as Pius's would have. And yet, as quickly as it began, it ended. To think that once I could not see beyond the veil of reality, to see those who dwell behind. I was once a fool.
so I'm going to breeze past the debate section that's usually a staple in these videos, the sole reason being that despite the somewhat niche nature of Eternal Darkness, those who have played it have nearly universally loved it. Seriously, look at the reviews. 9.6 out of 10 from IGN, 92% on Metacritic. Even Google audience reviews seem to give it a perfect 5 stars. There is nothing giving it less. It's hard to find someone who's played this and not enjoyed themselves. It is one of only a very few games that capture that Lovecraftian atmosphere just right. When I think of Lovecraftian games, of course, dozens come to mind, but of those dozens, so few are actually worth playing, or even remotely unsettling. And the ones that do it right tend to have that caveat, it's good, but... For example, Dark Corners of the Earth is another great game, but it's a buggy mess and sort of falls apart halfway through. Bloodborne is a masterwork of cosmic horror, but it's not really scary. It's action. Hell, even in recent history, the games released in this genre can be good, but they're never great. Eternal Darkness doesn't have that but statement. It's excellent, and even the modern gamer is going to have no problems dropping into this one, outside finding a working copy. The atmosphere remains dark and memorable. It reveals just enough of the workings of cosmic horror and conspiracy to keep us moving forward, but never really answering all the questions you have. It's a game that makes you question exactly what's going on and why, and to top it all off, the gameplay is just outright enjoyable. You aren't going to find a game using tank controls that handles better than this. The sheer number and variety of weapons, spanning millennia, puts Resident Evil to shame, and the magic system is both complex and enjoyable to use. The only really negative thing you can point out would be the simple nature of the puzzles, though this can be rationalized as a good way to keep the player moving forward, focused on the true cosmic puzzle at the heart of this game. Really only one question remains. The darkness comes. Will you stand against it, or be swept aside? That's all I have for Eternal Darkness. I hope you all enjoyed my first spooky season game. Since I skipped the usual review section, I thought I would make it up to anyone who makes it to the end of the video by teasing my next video. We are going to be heading back into familiar, yet different territory, and cover the winner of our first ever community poll. A mysterious wizard of immense power has kidnapped our childhood friend. Only we can rescue her, and finally discover the true nature of our divine heritage. See you in the next video.